Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto Died and Became a Hollow. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 9, Mito de un Dios. Drowning. As Naruto underwent his transformation, it felt as though he had been submerged into a burning lake of fire. An intense feeling of depraved pleasure had morphed into nothing more than a sensation of pure agony. The power that he had gained for his own benefit was now threatening to consume him, and make him into a mindless beast. Drowning. Even now, he could feel it. The rush of the hundreds of souls he had consumed, including Kyuubi's, throughout his entire body. The cold touch of their essences sent shivers down his spine. He could just feel them eating away at him, attempting to gain control of his body. Gain control of him. He muttered something incomprehensible in the dark, in a shaky voice that seemed to spell complete hopelessness. All of the hollows, all of their despair, all of their hatred, all of their sadness. All of those things unified under one being, projecting themselves through Naruto, all as one. There came painful sounding cracking noises from over all areas of Naruto's body. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and all 4 of his legs receded into his own body. The voices of the crowd above him faded, and all he could hear was the endless sounds of hundreds of souls fighting inside his mind. His vision blurred, and the world around him began to rock and shake. He held his front paw in front and face, vaguely sensing the blurry shape and texture. He caught his breath when little pieces of flesh flaked off his paw, all of them joining together to mingle in the soft breeze. He numbly noted that this was happening to his entire body. His legs, his head, his stomach. All of it. His body was dissolving into dust, yet the sense of burning pain was diminishing. It was like the rapidly enclosing feeling of oblivion numbing him to any sort of feeling. Before long, he reached that oblivion. His former body was completely destroyed after about a minute of changing, and for a second he felt it as he relinquished control. The unbearable cold chill of nothingness. If he gave in to those other souls, that was what was going to happen to him. And then, he came back. The flakes of Naruto's body dispersed into the wind, but a shapeless black mass, almost like a silky cloth, formed on the direct spot where he had disappeared. It was surreal. This was the feeling of being bodiless, of being ethereal. Nothing more than a consciousness that existed without a body, hardly aware of what it was doing. The black mass began to fester, before it shot up towards the sky at much faster speed, twisting around itself as it rose about 50 feet in the air. It displaced dirt as it rose, making Naruto's tunnel even larger than before. Then, it started to take form. The black mass became a billowing black robe that hid the being's soon-to-be arms. It grew chalk-white legs that sprouted from beneath the thing's robe, with large, pointed feet the same color as its legs. Its head appeared next, following the same pattern as its torso. Finally, its mask appeared. A vulpine mask similar to Naruto's other one, yet it was flatter with more rounded features. The eye holes were empty and sunken, and they just stared out into space. It was in stark contrast to the former Naruto's life-filled eyes. Naruto glanced downwards at an impossibly slow rate, surveying his new body. He had just barely wrestled control from the other hollows he had absorbed, and was thoroughly relieved when he didn't turn out like most of the other Jillian. He was superior than them. He still retained his consciousness. He would continue to evolve. He opened his mouth in order to say something, but the only noise that came out was a low, primal roar. He tried again, but the result was the same. As he thought about it, he realized that he had never heard a Jillian speak before. Did they have the ability? Whatever was wrong with his vocal cords, he didn't know. But he had a sinking feeling that he would never be able to communicate with others as long as he was a Jillian. The spectators were stunned by this new Jillian with the unique mask, and as it roared, their attention was drawn to its mask. It was almost exactly the same as that rabid fox hollow from earlier. That disgusting being had evolved. Questions exploded in the viewers' heads like fireworks. How had he evolved from right under their noses? How didn't he die from the barrage of Siros from the Jillian? What rock did he crawl out from under? The fox's sudden evolution was just so ridiculous, even if most of them admitted they were used to the impossible happening in Hueco Mundo. The other Jillian did not notice the presence of their new brethren, not even when it slowly thundered on over to them and bit a chunk out of the closest one to it. The wounded Jillian roared before it collapsed onto the ground much like a falling tower. Naruto chewed stoically on his meal, as the other Jillians finally noticed his presence, and swiveled their heads to look at him. He didn't look at them, not even when they began milling directly around him. He broke the circle by eating another one directly to his right, and the slow and unintelligent Jillian were unable to respond as he walked out of the circle. After around a minute, 5 Jillian mustered up the organization to all use their Siros simultaneously on the new one. They didn't even get to use it as they were all slashed diagonally across the midsection in a silver streak before they even got to use their attack. The diagonally bisected hollows roared one last time before they vanished into dust. Naruto himself roared when he turned around to view the destroyed Jillian, and was slightly relieved to see Furos standing there. He was flaked with dried blood, and his mask wore an bitter scowl, but he seemed relatively unharmed. "Naruto, is that you?" "It is, isn't it? You've evolved into a Jillian, and you've had the rare miracle of retaining a conscience. With your personality, I guess that's no surprise, huh? You're so determined and egotistical that there's no way you'd ever fall victim to oblivion. You saw what happened, didn't you? That cataclysmic attack. The attack that wiped out our comrades. You don't care, do you?" Naruto roared in response, and Furos felt a great sadness blossom inside of him due to the loss of his newfound friend. "That's right, you can't talk. In fact, you probably haven't even noticed that I'm here right now. I must be losing my mind after all that time in prison." Furos slashed an incoming Jillian. It roared one last time before dissolving into a black mist. "Us hollows. We have to eat to survive. But does that mean we should enjoy it? That we should always adhere to the contraband stereotypes of the Shinigami? I hate eating other hollows. Every time I bite into their flesh, I hear the cold contempt the Shinigami race has for us. We have at least one thing in common, Naruto. We both hate the Shinigami. I don't know what happened to make you hate them, but when I saw you for the first time in the hive, it gave me hope. That there was a solitary beacon of divine vengeance and justice against the murdering Shinigami. We're different than most other hollows, who are simply content to about their lives, uncaring of the effects the Shinigami have on our species." Furos stopped to stare dumbly into space as the Jillian Naruto completely ignored him, and began chewing on yet another Jillian. It was surprising. This Naruto ate with a slow boredom, in comparison with the former Naruto who ate with greedy relish. Maybe that was an improvement. Almost like he was anticipating an attack, he pulled himself up from his crouched position, and began to slowly charge up his newfound Siro. The red ball of energy formed slowly, much slower than the other Jillian. But as he released it, the red stream of dangerous light tore through a slowly oncoming Jillian, leaving a gaping hole where the creature's stomach would have been. The downed Jillian fell like a skyscraper, almost knocking into some of its fellows as it collapsed. The Jillian looked at their downed comrade, and didn't even notice anything when Naruto had bit into the shoulder of the closest Jillian yet again. He ripped the black fabric-like substance from the bitten shoulder, growling slightly as the Jillian fell. One Jillian looked at its fallen companions for an extended period of time, long enough for Naruto to reveal grisly, white arms from his cloak. They grasped the Jillian's shoulders, finally prompting the stupid beast to notice. Naruto and the other Jillian stared each other down for a few seconds, before the grabbed Jillian finally realized it was in danger, and began charging up its Siro. Before it could release it though, Naruto bit into the other Jillian's shoulder blade and tore another chunk clean off. His growling got even louder. The Jillian released its Siro as it fell, angled slightly upwards. The attack clipped some of the spectators in the crowd, atomizing them instantly, much to the dismay of all the other spectators who weren't killed. The hissing and jeering drowned out Naruto's growling, though it wouldn't be that way for long as Naruto's growl became a piercing roar, one of being in clearly visible pain. The jeering from the crowd died down almost instantly after Naruto emitted that awful cry. His Ryatsu. It was getting stronger. Much stronger than ever before. A steam-like red aura was rising from Naruto's body, and Naruto's roaring increased as the mist became thicker and thicker. It even began to form a shroud around Naruto. A cold ball of anxiety appeared in Furomo's stomach, seeing the all-too-familiar spectacle unfold itself upon Naruto. His haunches drooped in nervousness, and he was unable to settle the feeling in his gut as the red aura completely wrapped around Naruto. No. It can't be. It's ludicrous. Those thoughts only served to straighten Furomo's, and did nothing for the intense feeling of emotion that was curled away inside him. He heard Naruto roar again, and realized how ridiculous those thoughts that comforted him were. He was wrong. It was the real deal. It's, said Furomo's in a near-silent whisper. The simple word produced more awe than a shocked scream ever could. Naruto was now nothing more than a blank silhouette in the swirling torrent of powerful energy. A tense silence filled the arena as every being watching the sight unfold before their very eyes. The spectators had stopped jeering. The Jillians stood stock still, not even milling around as they usually do. Only Baragan showed no visible reaction, though the tightening of his grip on the throne would indicate that he was indeed bothered. A few of the weaker hollows fainted, the darkest corner of their minds producing nothing other than raw fear. The animalistic instinct of fight or flight. And this thing was definitely telling their minds to flee. Flee and never go near here again. Many individuals caught their breath, as the silhouette of Naruto began to morph. He was rapidly shrinking, his two-legged body once again changing to become four-legged. The red aura thickened even more, and the silhouette of Naruto became fully hidden from view by the thick, dark energy. And suddenly, the energy stopped moving. Dead silence reverberated throughout the entire arena, and no one said a word until the energy started picking up motion yet again. It rose and rose in speed, until it intensified to the point where it was buffeting around wildly, long tendrils of Ryatsu lashing out at anything that dared touch it. All non-Minos-level hollows in the arena found breathing to be difficult, the intense spiritual pressure smothering them. Some of the Jillian found themselves being whipped by the red energy, their big bodies serving as a big target for disaster. The Ryatsu tore through their bodies like paper, leaving gaping and mortal wounds to any Jillian who got too close. After around a minute of this, a small explosion was heard coming from Naruto's position inside the vortex. A second one resounded directly after, and then the energy and smoke began to disperse. When it cleared all the way, a fresh Naruto emerged, vastly different from his short-lived Jillian self. He held a look of satisfied confusion, pleased with what had suddenly happened, yet also greatly confused. His bipedal body had once again changed back to a quadrupedal form similar to when he was a normal hollow. He was smaller than before, a large difference in size between his Jillian self. Yet, he looked significantly more dangerous despite his small frame. With the exception of his mask, he was covered in a deep red bony armor, bulky enough to protect, but small enough to be maneuverable. His mask was more vulpine, more pronounced in its features. Yet, it did nothing to hide the cruel, terrible visage that lurked beneath its porcelain. The fox's gaze was once again evil, and once again mocking. Spikes were jutting up from various places along Naruto's body, a testament to his new appearance. Smaller spikes were projected from the hollow's neck, ankles, and knees. Yet easily the most prominent were the two larger twin spikes that jutted out from the top of his shoulder blades. They shot up before pointing forward in a curve, flanking both sides of Naruto's mask. They seemed to shine slightly with an unnatural gleam, which was the most noticeable in the dim light they were currently under. Claws even more vicious-looking adorned the hollow's feet. They looked denser, sharper, like they could cut nearly anything to ribbons. 9 tails sprouted from the fox's rear, covered in a thin red armor and poised in a clockwise rotating spiral. Adjuchas. Furomo's whispered, not in fear or awe, but a mutual understanding. I just don't understand how. Ixiso. Baragan mused, his booming voice drawing the attention of several nearby hollows. They had never heard of anything like this before, but apparently their king had. I've seen this before. The natural phenomenon even rarer than the Jillian's evolution to Adjuchas. Those Jillians set to evolve to the next stage of existence change after consuming a mere 5 or 6 other Jillian. His servants and guards looked at their king curiously, having never heard of anything like this. Baragan raised his right arm daintily, an act of disdain against those ignorant fools. I'll explain. Hollows gain power by eating the flesh of Shinigami, humans, and other hollows. In addition, all hollows have the inherent ability to retain excess power when going through evolutionary leaps. In other words, it means that the gap between the next evolutionary stage becomes closer. However, when hollows go through an evolutionary leap, their last meal was usually a fairly small source of power, so this ability goes unnoticed by the vast majority of evolving hollows. He stared down at the new Adjuchas. But when the hollow consumes a being of much greater power than them, the ability becomes clear. They evolve much quicker than any other hollow using a different method ever could. Do you understand? A look of understanding and some nods answered Baragan's question. I don't know how that young hollow managed to do it, but he did. He consumed a very large source of power right before he evolved into a Jillian, and so he was able to evolve into an Adjuchas after consuming a mere few Jillian. Baragan took his eyes off Naruto, only to notice very concerned looks. His vassals were clearly worried about Naruto's rapid increase in power. The king stood up. This amusing little show has gone on long enough. This has been a great embarrassment to all of Las Noches. Our arena fighters failed to best a couple of puny little ants. It's time to end this, he said. Naruto was already giving a show down there. The crowd was absolutely outraged. First Jillian, now Adjuchas. What next? Naruto reared back his head and laughed uproariously, contrasting his dull, emotionless Jillian behavior. This one had the personality of the original Hollow Naruto. Loopy, flamboyant, and evil. I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. Yeah. Being a Jillian wasn't fun at all. That big-ass body, the lack of talking, and the fact that I was slow as hell. But now I'm an Adjuchas, and I'm ready to spread some carnage once again. The new Adjuchas screamed to the entire crowd. The crowd booed him. Naruto laughed. Are you guys happy to see little Olmi? I'm so flattered I think I could cry. True to his word, he started making obnoxious, sarcastic crying noises, falling to the ground because of the emotional joy. The crowd screamed in anger even more. Naruto got to his feet, adopting a serious look on his face. Well, it just so turns out I have a special surprise for every one of you, my wonderful fans out there in the audience. More boos. I'm putting on a special performance, all about my wonderful and epitomal self, just for you. I will host it in the first cave to the west of Las Noches in 1 week, so make sure you'll be there. The admission fee will just be your life, he said scarily. Silence, and then laughter from Naruto. Oops, I guess I can't put on a show for you if you're all dead. Silly me. Guess there will be no show after all. But you're all real disappointed now, aren't you? Well, that's too bad, because I won't be able to do it for you. The crowd hissed, and Baragan was surprised when Naruto turned his full attention on him. And you! Naruto yelled dramatically, pointing up at Baragan in his balcony. I'll bet you're real disappointed. I know how much you love me, gay man. Enough to lock me up in prison for 3 years and then make me compete in this worthless excuse for an arena. Well, you know what? Here's my response to that. The Adjuchas opened his mouth and sucked in a breath full of air. Tiny little particles of orange light gathered at the opening of his mouth, forming the familiar ball shape of a zero. As the crowd heard the signature hissing sound of death, a sense of dread settled in every one of their stomachs. In the center of the hollow's mouth, a full-fledged zero had formed of a gleaming orange color, and he was aiming it directly at Baragan. He wouldn't. Naruto released his zero, the brilliant orange beam of light racing to where Baragan was calmly sitting. The zero nailed the balcony, being entirely engulfed in the strong orange light. Every hollow in the stadium turned in pure fear towards their attacked king and god. Okay, so he would. Feeling satisfied, Naruto walked on over to where Furimose was standing, with a dumb look on his face from what had just happened. Now you've really rattled the monkey cage, he murmured, just loud enough for Naruto to hear him. Naruto chuckled. "Shall we go, then? I've got our escape route all set up," he said, gesturing over the hole he had come out of. His demeanor had changed completely, from the crazy slasher to a sane, though still sadistic individual. It made Furos wonder what the hell was happening with the fox. Speaking of the escape route, the mole hollow Naruto had fought earlier was groggily getting to his feet, using his powerful claws to clamber his way out of the giant hole. The poor hollow never expected his previous opponent to hop into the air and come down foot first on his head using a strong, downward thrust. The mole coughed up blood as Naruto's powerful claws sank into the mole's flesh. His vision blurred and became distorted, though his head was held aloft by Naruto. Now. You can't fall unconscious on us. That just will not do. You see, you are going to play a pivotal role in my brilliant escape plan, whether you want to or not," whispered Naruto in an eerie voice. The mole whimpered slightly, scarcely viewing Naruto's scary expression and hearing his hushed whisper. Dig. Every eye in the stadium, every spectator's mask was turned toward their king's balcony. The orange light had shielded their king's condition completely from view, and after it had dissipated, the smoke that had risen from the rubble created nothing more than a hazy, distorted silhouette of the skeleton. The smoke cleared after around a minute, but as soon as they found out their king was alive, it did nothing more than increase their fears. Baragan did not take being attacked very well. And when he was attacked, he tended to go on a violent rampage, executing everything in sight. Many hollows lived in constant fear of those rampages. It truly was the fear they had of their god. It was not to live in fear of his power. It was to live in fear of his previous actions. That was true submission. When he rose, the whole stadium buckled. A putrid purple mist was coming from his mouth, and even though it was slight, it was enough to begin rotting away the material that made up his balcony. The Zero had scalded the entire area to Baragan's right, and it was clear that Baragan had batted it away with one hand. Still, the fact that he, a god, had been attacked, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. By mere ants, no less. The ants had somehow been able to avoid all the dangers of his arena, and with some massive bullshit that involved the vulgar fox hollow evolving twice, had defeated all of his Jillian. Now, although the experience was humiliating and degrading for him, he wasn't stupid. Just because they defeated his arena fighters by no means meant that they'd be able to defeat his army. Hell, just one of his personal guard would be enough for them. Speaking of which, his personal guard was standing poised stoically right beside him, 6 powerful Adjuchas ready to fight to the death for their king. He was about to motion for them to finish the job, when he noticed something curious down on the field. There was a stout mole hollow, one of his judging by the insignia, who was being forced to dig a path for the fox Adjuchas. Within 5 seconds, the fox hollow had disappeared into the earth, the firefly Adjuchas following up the rear a few seconds later. Baragan could have screamed in absolute rage. First, those little ants make a big mockery of the greatest competition he could think of, and now they believe they could away with it scot-free. He lowered his hand, deciding not to send his guards after them through the hole. They'll have to surface eventually. It's impossible to burrow out of the palace because the hard material goes underground as well. Though, they might not resurface until the very last minute. Which means I'll have to. You! Pointing to the guard directly to his right, who stood up straight. Place the entire palace on lockdown. Do not let a single hollow in or out of these walls, he ordered. The guard bowed to his master, and with a quick sigh he disappeared. With the first guard gone, Baragan turned his attention to the guard on his left. And you, gather all the main forces and capture those 2 renegade hollows, for committing the crime of avoiding divine judgment. Alert all of my vassals to their presence, and order them to report to the local authorities if they spot the fugitives. Once you have captured them, bring them directly to my throne room. Baragan paused, his face holding a look of determination. I want to deal with them personally. Chapter 10, Bloqueo de las Noches. Naruto watched as the mole hollow dug his way through Las Noches underground, a rabid grin on his face while he continued to slave drive the abused hollow. Furos was crawling right behind him, and the mole. He hadn't said anything since their escape from the arena, and seemed to only dumbly follow him with an unreadable expression on his face. He was being an enigma, that was for sure. Before any of this, before the arena, he always liked to talk. Even when they were trapped in that prison, Naruto spent much of his time talking to Furos. But now, there was nothing. The mole slowed a bit, prompting Naruto to sink his claws into his hostage's back to force him to dig faster. The mole hollow grunted. Any resistance or snarky comments would lead to constant claws in the back. His only chance of survival was to dig these bastards out and swiftly slit their throats as soon as they breached the surface. He was still yearning to finish the fight, to put down that fox hollow in the name of Las Noches. How stupid of him, he realized. The fox was in Adjuchas now, and the only way he could hope to kill him was to catch him off guard. So, the mole hollow continued to dig their way out, clods of sand and dirt being spread in a sporadic pattern. The earth parted as the group of three reached the surface, and a messy hole meant to accommodate the three hollows appeared as a small dot on the Las Noches landscape. The mole hollow pushed his way out first, collapsing on the ground from exhaustion. He had been digging for almost 5 hours straight, and that slave driver of a hollow had worked him to exhaustion. Naruto came up immediately behind him, using his sharp claws to push himself out of the hole. As he looked around, he noticed they had surfaced in a wide, particularly flat area. Large crimson pillars rose up hundreds of feet above the landscape, towering over their minuscule frames like a powerful god ready to invoke judgment on them. There was a collapsed building some distance away, but the rest of the area around here seemed to be nothing but sand. The Hueco Mundo night sky loomed straight above them. The artificial sky that would be put here in later years was not in existence yet. The mole hollow was staring at him intensely, but Naruto ignored him as he helped Furos out of the hole. The insect hollow gave a grunt of acknowledgement, but otherwise said nothing. Furos let go of his claws as soon as he was out, and then began to brush off the sand that coated his body. "You okay?" asked Naruto. The mole was still staring on him. "Why, yeah," Furos said quietly, turning his eyes to the right to stare at the ground. The mole hollow began to rustle. "Good. But we can't stay here forever. All of Las Noches is bound to be looking for us considering I attacked their precious king. Fortunately, there seems to be no guards or soldiers around that would hinder our progress, but we're not out of the woods yet." Furos nodded, deciding to speak for the first time to preserve his life. "That's right, and we have no idea of our location within Las Noches. It could take hours or even days to reach one of the gates out of here, and for the time being we're sitting ducks. To get out, we'll have to avoid any large congregation of hollows. But there's also sentries placed at many points around Las Noches. Even if we avoid the highly populated areas, the chances that we will be found are very high." Naruto frowned, allowing his rational side to do the thinking for once. But it wouldn't think for long because he the whooshing noise of the mole hollow trying to sneak over to him with his claws at the ready. Naruto ignored the mole hollow, instead focusing all his attention on his companion in front of him. He didn't even flinch when the mole tried to bury his sharp claws deep inside Naruto's jugular vein. The key word here is tried. The mole hollow tried to sink his claws in Naruto's throat, but they were stopped when the claws hit the tough exterior of Naruto's body armor, and did not penetrate the hollow's skin. Sparks flew and the mole hollow roared in pain as his precious claws snapped in half as easily as a brittle piece of driftwood. The mole brought back his right paw, hiding it so it wouldn't get even more injured. Naruto finally blinked, before his face split into a grin, and then finally rude, raucous laughter. He sauntered slowly on over to where the mole hollow was sitting, ignoring Furos' questioning gaze. Before the mole hollow could even react, Naruto had already picked up the helpless creature. Holding him at arm's length for about a second, he slammed the poor hollow into the dirt, creating a miniature crater as he did. The mole hollow felt his ribs crack, and blood rose into his throat until he couldn't take it anymore, and coughed it out. Was it really useless all this time? He really couldn't kill the fox hollow now that he was in Adjuchas, could he? Satisfied? You just had to go and try your luck against something that you couldn't beat. And look where you are now, groveling in the dirt over some claws that you lost by merely attacking me. Even before this you couldn't match me, so what made you think you could now? His speech over, Naruto picked up the mole hollow yet again, dug his claws into the hollow's arms, and using careful precision, made sure his victim was in as much pain as possible. Furos couldn't look at this. He couldn't look at the closest thing he had to a friend, and see him do this. He hadn't had any friends during those days, and after spending so much time with Naruto, he was about to see his hopes and dreams crushed under the unbearable truth. He cursed himself. He knew he was more like a human than a hollow. But as much as he cursed his own pathetic emotions, he cursed the world around him more than anything. Why would it let him be such a being of compassion and idealism when it was so disadvantageous to be so? He finally closed his eyes after he heard a thick scream from the mole hollow, followed by more laughter. He opened them after the screaming subsided, and to no great surprise, nothing but intense brutality awaited his vision. He didn't know how Naruto could have such a blatant disregard for his own species. Though Furos supposed he could blame his own silly expectations again. Of course he was capable of something like that. Naruto had used his shoulder spikes in a manner he didn't believe the fox hollow capable of thinking of. The mole hollow's entire body was hanging from Naruto's right shoulder, hanging like a limp rag doll down to Naruto's feet, where a red puddle of blood painted the sand. Impalement, that's what his was. Naruto's shoulder spike had appeared on the other end, through the mole's backside, while the barely breathing hollow had slid down the spike to hit Naruto's body. This in turn drove more spikes into the suffering hollow's torso. Fortunately, Furos' life as a hollow and the atrocities he had seen numbed him to the pain, so he avoided vomiting at the sight or even becoming enraged at it. But, as he saw the small mole hollow impaled by his friend's spikes, horribly clinging on to life while suffering extreme agony, he knew he couldn't deny it anymore. A part of him still wished it to be true, but the sneaking sensation that this little fox hollow would be the savior of their species was dead wrong. What a fool he was! It was a simple hunch in the first place, and even with the decisiveness he had never seen in another hollow, Naruto wouldn't save anyone. If anything, he would lead Hueco Mundo into ruination. He had to be stopped. Naruto wasn't paying any attention to him. He was much too busy relishing in the mole hollow's pain. He didn't even hear the rustling of the sand as he got up. But he knew he was too late to save the unfortunate hollow now. He had hesitated too much, and as soon as the firefly Adjuchas was fully standing, Naruto finally got bored of his victim, and promptly slit its throat without a second thought. Naruto then thrust his right shoulder outwards, and with a sickening tearing noise the carcass of the mole hollow was released from its cruel impalement spike, and was thrown forward a distance away. That was when Furos struck, and Naruto never expected it. The insect hollow was fast, and his motivation seemed to do nothing but increase his speed and strength. His vicious, curved pincer caught Naruto straight in the cheek, and Naruto was sent flying backwards into the dirt, a small cut present where Furos had hit him. Furos waited for the Adjuchas to get up. The area was silent, and Furos stood there watching ahead, like a stone statue, his pained gaze patiently waiting for Naruto's rebuttal. He knew right now that this would not be an easy fight. "What are you doing, Furos?" asked Naruto tersely, his voice creating a suffocating tension in the air. There was rage, there was a deep sadness, there was a great confusion, but there was no trace of the psychotically happy Naruto that had been traveling with him the past 3 years. Furos couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The hollow's voice, Furos didn't know why he hadn't noticed it before. Every word he spoke was tinged with anger and hatred, years and years of emotional turmoil spilling out into the monster that stood before him now. The hollowification must have just been the trigger for him to become this. There was too much hate, too much rage, for it to just exist because of his life as a hollow. But Furos didn't know if he was imagining it or not, but he thought he could see a faint bit of caring, of compassion, deep within Naruto's existence. Even if that were the case, it was being completely swallowed up by his hatred. The hollow's gaze was no longer friendly, no longer amiable. It was just pure hostility. Like the hollow can sever his previous friendships and bonds within a split second. Furos didn't reply, and opted to do nothing more than glare in Naruto's direction. "Do you have a problem with me, Furos? All that wanton killing getting to your head?" Naruto asked. Even when angry, he always found a way to mock someone. Though this time, it was neither teasing nor happy. It was serious. Furos still said nothing, but he was seething on the inside. He brought his pincers to the forefront, and his bioluminescent parts shone even brighter. It was a good thing that he did defend, because Naruto had already disappeared from his spot, and had reappeared adjacently to the other Adjuchas. He spread his claws wider, but Furos was ready. He caught each of Naruto's front paws with his pincers, and the two of them stood there in a tug-of-war-like fashion. Naruto pulled his paws back, and using careful balance on one of his back legs, swung all 9 of his tails around in a circular motion. This may look ridiculous and ineffective at first, but the sturdy armor that completely covered the tails managed to pummel the opponent. Furos was hit several times with the flying appendages, and the hard armor he was being hit with managed to draw up some blood. Furos managed to push away the offending tails, but Naruto soon retaliated by using his forefront tail to put Furos into a chokehold. He stood there quietly for a little while, making sure his choke attack was starting to take effect. I'm still waiting for my answer, Furos. What problem do you have with me? Is it the killing? Or is it something entirely different? Asked Naruto. He loosened his tail's grip on Furos' neck, before bringing it back fully to join the spiral of tails. Furos stumbled slightly, leaning down to catch his breath. He never stopped glaring at Naruto, his anger for him only increasing after Naruto's assault. Do you know why I even joined you in the first place, Naruto? He asked rhetorically. Naruto had the decency to look slightly confused, wondering why Furos would start his explanation with another question. He looked up at the Hueco Mundo moon, the only universal thing capable of calming all hollows. I joined you, because the moment I saw you, I believed that you would bring universal betterment to all hollows. That quick decisiveness coupled with a dogmatic view against the Shinigami is exactly what we need to overcome them. At the very least, I hoped you would become the personal advisor to Baragan, and influence his actions on the world of Hueco Mundo. I never knew Baragan to be so hot-headed. Naruto sneered, looking thoroughly unpleased with Furos' speech. His stance was rigid, his eyes cold, and he was irritably hoping that Furos continued. But now I see that all as ever was a blind hope. A hunch, and nothing more. I can see now that was being a fool. I can see now how black your removed heart is. All the killing, all the brutality, all the unspeakable acts, they are the reason I have decided to stop you here. You will not be the savior of our race. You will be our destruction if you are allowed to roam free. The world was near silent, and only the slight running wind overturning the sand echoed throughout Las Noches. Then, as Furos was staring Naruto down, there was a slight clapping noise. The clap escalated, then there was the sound of a cold, cruel laugh echoing in the area. What a brilliant speech, Furos, but I'm afraid your disgusting idealism ruined it for me. You, of all people, are telling me that all the killing I've done is bad. You're a hollow, and you have no right to hold any moralism or idealism. Looking at you now, you're more suited for being a Shinigami, despite how much you seem to hate them. So save bullshit like that for the Shinigami, you little chicken shit. Furos looked highly offended as his beliefs were put into question. He was about to retort, but Naruto was already closing the distance and attacking them. The Adjuchas blocked both of Naruto's front paws yet again. You'll find yourself a minority here in Hueco Mundo, Furos. Part of a minority of those fucking moralistic shitrag hollows that rarely inhabit this land. Trying to purge Hueco Mundo of those hollows and creating a better society is something that is near impossible. Furos looked worried as Naruto began to get the advance on him. The insect almost tried to let go of the claws and avoid, but the other Adjuchas was not about to let that happen. Using his superior agility, the hollow flipped skyward using his hind legs, so that his tails and back paws were facing the sky. Using the momentum he had built up, the hollow grasped the pincers with the paws, and as he fell he flipped Furos above his head so he would go crashing into the ground. The awkward attack paid off somewhat, as the force was against Furos, and he did in fact go crashing into the ground. Naruto, on the other hand, had landed on his feet quite easily. Furos grunted as he hit the floor, even if the sand broke his fall somewhat. Naruto looked back and grinned as Furos rose to his feet. He looked disgruntled, and the green material on his back was glowing brighter now. Naruto showed his serrated teeth, before opening his maw. His signature orange syrup formed inside. Furos watched the ball of light warily, careful about it but not looking too concerned. He's too quick for me to get him with hand-to-hand combat. The only way for me to win is to use my abilities carefully, and rely on quick thinking. I wonder, is there anything around here that I can use to my advantage? It's a wide open plain, so resources and stealth are out of the question. His will and strength are too great for me to manipulate with my light, but it's worth a shot at least. The green light glowed brighter. The point-blank zero was fired from Naruto's mouth, but Furos sidestepped to the left to avoid. Naruto himself seemed to predict this, and he disappeared in a flash to reappear near his opponent. Furos' eyes widened. Damn, looks like he figured out how to use Sonido. I don't have time to. A thrust with Naruto's right hand was gone through his head, but Furos managed to block it with the swipe of his hand. Furos stumbled backwards, but Naruto held his ground to press the attack further. He feigned another thrust of the claws, which Furos tried to guard on impulse. He didn't realize his mistake until it was too late. Naruto pulled his right arm out quickly, then put both his front paws out there in a cup formation. Before Furos could react further, a zero had already been formed in the crevice of Naruto's paws. Furos charged up his own zero, which was the light green of the crystals that coated his body. The two beams of light hit each other after fired, either one of them able to gain any ground each other. They actually began to merge at one point, but after a few seconds, Furos was forced to withdraw as the beam overwhelmed him. Naruto was still on guard when the light dissipated. Indeed, Furos was about 20 feet away from him at this point, and was still quite alive and kicking, despite all the serious burns that covered his frame. He was bending over on the ground, coughing up blood and smoke. Even then, the green bioluminescence hadn't dissipated at all, nor did Furos look like he was ready to give up. The firefly struggled to his feet shakily. He didn't say anything again, and only flared his pincers out again as Naruto seemed to come in for yet another attack. He looked at the green bioluminescence on his arm, before it rapidly changed to a foggy, gray light. Influenza, he muttered, and a bright flash of green light blinded the oncoming hollow. Desconcierto. Naruto reared back, blinded for a short time. Shortly before, he was attacking with the full intent of thrusting his spiked arms straight through Furos' abdomen. As he stopped, his mind became numb. Almost like he was in a daze. The world became silent, and he could hear nothing but a slight whirring in his ears. And then, it happened. There was a faint voice, deep within his mind. Prodding, pinching. Trying to get him to do a certain thing. It was telling him that he was Furos, and that he should attack himself. He knew such a thing was ridiculous, and despite that notion, his confused mind seemed to believe it. His arm was raising against his will. It was struggling, but it was in fact raising. Once fully stretched outwards, Naruto sent a blank look at it through half-lidded eyes. Gravity wasn't against it anymore, so it would be far easier to be manipulated. His mind was telling him to thrust backwards, and he did. The spikes that were present on his arm penetrated through the bony, red armor on his body, and delivered a painful wound to his stomach. The pain jolted Naruto back to his senses, and he gasped and coughed up blood. He ripped the spikes from his body, before glancing at the blood-covered weapons. There were 4 large holes throughout his abdomen, right where the spikes had penetrated. He looked around. Furos was gone. Where could? He stopped thinking when he saw a large shadow coming down on him from behind. A shockwave exploded when pincer met with claw. A sneak aerial attack from behind. Furos was getting more and more tricky to fight. He steeled himself for another light attack, and was not disappointed when Furos' light changed to green. Influenza, said Furos again, as the green light flashed again. Naruto tensed, closing his eyes in an attempt to avoid the deadly light. He opened his eyes when he felt Furos take his pincer off his claw. Oh shit! A feint attack, he thought. Naruto gasped and flew backwards when a powerful kick caught him straight in the ribs. He skidded through the sand, the dirty substance and friction causing more problems for the already wounded Hollow. He climbed to his feet, but Furos was already on his way. It seems my influenza is working at least slightly. I managed to confuse him with the gray light, but it took some effort on my part. If he strengthens his willpower, I'll be hard-pressed to be able to manipulate him. All the colors of my light induce a certain effect on an individual's mind, but anyone with conscious thought can throw it off easily. For now I'll try. Influenza. The light changed to yellow. Apasigua. The yellow light hit Naruto full on this time, and he had no chance to close his eyes and avoid the attack. When the light subsided, Naruto felt no change, unlike what had happened the last time. There was no prodding voice, nor numbness of the mind. He shook himself around to test it, before he laughed suddenly, and then reappeared at Furos' side again. Your little trick didn't work on me, Furos. That will cost you big time, he shrieked, as he whipped his tail out to attack. He stopped. At the last moment. He didn't know why, but as soon as the attacking appendage was about to hit Furos, his mind was telling him that he couldn't go through with it. He just froze in mid-strike, but when he looked up at Furos' face, he knew the trick had worked after all. And now to finish you off with... Furos changed his light to purple. Influenza. Paralysis. Naruto's eyes dilated as the purple light washed over him. His mind was screaming at his body to move, yet it wasn't responding. The entirety of his being stood still, only slight shakes visible to the trained eye. His eyes were darting to and fro, searching for an escape in vain. He noticed that Furos' light had turned to red after the fact. Influenza. Atake Rojo Mortal. Furos' only attack light thrusted forward and impaled Naruto's straight through the right lung in a narrow line of blood-red light similar to a laser. The fox Hollow grunted in pain, and collapsed heavily onto the ground, blood rapidly flowing from his wound. Furos looked frustrated. Naruto had broken out of his paralysis at the last second, and moved in order to prevent the attack from being fatal. It was made even worse because of his taunt. That stupid light could never hold me for very long, idiot. And the red light attack was about as damaging as a bee sting, Naruto croaked, lying through his teeth to make Furos feel bad. That sardonic smile, that infuriating evil smile was on his face, and it remained on his face even as Furos walked up to him and kicked him right in the head viciously. You dash. Kick. You kick. You kick. 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 That word was all that Furos could say as he repeatedly kicked Naruto in the head, desperately attempting to wipe the smile off Naruto's face. Furos' usual look of composure was replaced with a distraught, panicking expression. How could you be so vile? So heartless? Even for a Hollow you have no redeeming qualities. What motivates you to do that? What could you achieve by acting in such a manner? Tell me! Tell me, Naruto! Naruto laughed loopily, cheering and whooping to the sky. He turned to Furos, his smile growing even more vile. You want to know? He asked dangerously. Furos growled at the Hollow, and kicked him one more time. He was certain that the answer he received would either make no sense or actually worsen his opinion of Naruto. Well, I'll tell you, Furos. The reason I act this way is he paused for dramatic effect. Combination of Hollow behavior and personal satisfaction. Furos paused, a look of morbid curiosity on his face. What? Let me explain. You, Furos, are a rare exception to Hollows. You actually have compassion. I may have gained some semblance of compassion with an unfortunate encounter in the arena, but I'm doing my best to stamp that out. Most Hollows I've seen that exist in this world act without compassion. They kill for food, yes, but they often have fun while doing so. I, however, have a long-standing goal that is more than just food. My goals are the top priority in my life, but who the hell says I can't act on my Hollow behavior and have some fun while doing so? While Naruto was explaining this, he snuck one of his tails behind Furos, who seemed even angrier at that response. Why yo! Squelch. With all the force of a bullet, Naruto had directly thrust his hidden tail in the exact same spot where Furos had injured Naruto. It penetrated the muscle easily, and Naruto stabbed his tail in as deep as he possibly could, before pulling it out with a squelch of effort. Furos roared in pain, taking 2 steps back from Naruto, clutching the wound he had gotten. Naruto was already rising to his feet again. He stood up straight and looked proud, despite the heavy wound on his torso. Blood ran from Furos' mouth as he clutched his wound, and he glared heavily at Naruto. "Why, you bastard. You were faking it all along?" Naruto grinned. "I'm not gonna get caught by your fucking light tricks anymore. I've already figured out how to throw off all of them. And you should really think things through before you decide to go have a nice conversation with a fallen enemy, do you, Babas?" he drawled. Furos growled, then screamed at Naruto, his veins bulging and his Ryatsu increasing. "Atake Rojo Mortal Doble!" he roared. Twin beams of red light flew from Furos' body, aiming to put more holes in Naruto. Naruto deftly flipped over the first, before casually spinning over the second, pretending to be afraid all the while. Naruto charged a Siro and fired it. He whined when it missed its mark and flashed to meet Furos, not noticing the orange Riryoki gathering on one of his tails. Furos was still recovering from his last attack, and was unprepared when Naruto appeared at him, wanted to get in a tail strike. Both combatants were surprised when instead of a tail strike, a bright orange crescent of Ryatsu flew off of Naruto's tail and struck Furos straight in the stomach. He barreled back a great distance, far more than any of his attacks did to Naruto. Naruto himself just stood there, stunned at what had just happened. "What was that?" "It came from my tail, but I didn't know that I could do that. It looks Ryatsu-based. Does that mean I can manipulate Ryatsu with my tails?" Naruto looked giddy at that thought, but it changed to thoughtfulness as Furos rose. "Only one way to find out." Furos stood, mind reeling on what kind of attack that was. The attack seemed kind of like a compressed Siro, but it gave him a nasty gash wound in his abdomen. If Naruto learns a new attack here, then I'm in deep trouble now. I had a hard enough time keeping up with him regularly. I'll just have to hope that attack was just a fluke, and then press him with more red light. He tried to look at his back, which was the only part of his body completely covered in the crystalline, green substance. I'll have to use my strongest light attack for this. It's risky, as I have to take my eyes off my opponent, but it'll be the only thing capable of taking down Naruto at this point. Though more than 3 shots of that, and I'll tire myself out too much to fight anymore, he whispered to himself. Naruto meanwhile was testing out his new attack, and managed to replicate it without too much effort. "Alright, I think I've figured it out. It's just like a Siro, just manipulated. Heh, reminds me of all the shape manipulation I did back in Konoha. I guess they were good for something, after all. I'm still gonna crush them, though," Naruto giggled. His happy thoughts were cut off though, as his attention was drawn to little blips of red light that somehow made their way into his vision. He looked up, and noticed that it was Furos, standing 30 feet away with his back exposed to him. Indeed, the red blips of light were all over his back. They were perfectly uniform, and there were 12 in all. What's he doing? If he takes his eyes off me, he's just asking to be. His eyes widened as he came to a realization. "Oh, sure. Rayo Espalda Rojo!" yelled Furos. The little blips of light expanding to go forth at about 50 feet, resembling a laser with its red sheen and energy. Naruto barely managed to get out of the rays, but Furos was ready for another round. The second round of beams was when Naruto wasn't so lucky. He managed to mostly avoid the grid of lasers, but one beam clipped his shoulder, while another fully nailed his left legs. He stood there in agony for a few seconds before the laser dissipated, trying to limp away. La Kava! Naruto gathered Ryatsu into his tail, and flung it to form the familiar hook of energy that injured Furos earlier. Furos was already preparing for the final attack, and couldn't sense the oncoming energy. The hook of energy wounded his entire back, forcing him to stumble and cough up blood. "No, I must complete it. He's crippled, and this is the last chance I'll get to take him out." The final set of beams was ready for firing, and Naruto knew this. His injured leg made things difficult to move, and there was no way he'd be able to fully avoid this last set of beams. So, he did the best thing he could think of. He ran towards Furos, gathering Ryatsu on 3 of his tails. That was his limit. He knew he couldn't form any more Ryatsu on his tails simultaneously. The final set was released, and Naruto was hit 4 times throughout the torso and legs. The lasers disappeared, and Naruto resisted the urge to fall to his knees and admit defeat. Furos would be unable to avoid this attack. Lost trace Kuvas! Naruto yelled, flinging his first tail at Furos. For some reason, his other 2 tails didn't launch the attack. Maybe he had to wait and start a new motion. Furos sighed in relief. He heard the attacks connect with Naruto, but he hadn't turned around to see the hollow defeated. He wondered how many holes Naruto was filled with now. His attacks over, Furos decided to turn around and confirm Naruto's situation. Indeed, the first thing he saw was his opposing hollow. There were 6 holes littering his body. The first from his original red light attack, there were 3 through his legs, and 2 through the right side of his torso. Each hole was equal in size, and they were bleeding profusely from all of them. He could also see through the holes, showing that his beams had impaled right through him. But then he saw the orange curve of light coming right at him. It nailed him right where his first wound from that attack was. The Ryatsu whirred and vibrated, cutting into the already wounded flesh and drawing up blood. The firefly gasped and stumbled backwards to the right, barely managing to keep himself upright after that. But then, Naruto fired a second curve of orange light. This one caught Furos in the legs, and it forced him down to his knees. He was breathing heavily, blood pouring from his mouth, when Naruto launched his third one. He panicked, his life flashing before his eyes as the orange beam of light quickly approached. He was slashed, diagonally across his hollow hole. The firefly gasped for breath, his eyes wide and bloodshot, as red blood shot in a stream upwards. The top half of his body teetered and wobbled before, when in an instance where time impossibly slowed down, collapsed onto the ground face first. Furos choked on his own blood. He couldn't move, and his entire body felt like it was on fire. This can't be happening. I can't. I won't be beat. But, as the firefly hollow gurgled out blood, he knew it. He was beaten. He was dead, killed at the hands of this hollow. This vile, unspeakable. Wait! An unfamiliar thought worked its way through Furos' mind, and he remembered a conversation he had had earlier with Naruto. I may have gained some semblance of compassion. Furos' mind somehow became clearer, and those words continuously repeated themselves throughout his head. That's right, Naruto did have some slight semblance of compassion. It was very minuscule, and almost completely overwhelmed by the hatred, the monster. The very same monster that was approaching him right now with a limp in his steps. He was going to die. His injuries were too deep, but in one last fleeting moment, he hoped to be able to appeal to Naruto. He knew right now that small bit of compassion would not save Naruto's hometown, but he wondered, would it be able to listen to the one being that managed to befriend him in this godforsaken place? No matter how much he loathed Naruto now, no matter how much he didn't want to do this, he knew he had to. It was the only way to keep his dream alive. Chapter 11, Experimento de la Sociedad de Almas. Naruto didn't know what he should have felt at this moment in time. As much as he hated to admit it, for better or for worse, Furos had been his only real companion throughout all the trials he had faced thus far. Those 3 years in prison, well, he doubted that they would have been as bearable if he had been alone. His conscience was telling him things he was loath to do, but since when did he ever listen to his conscience? Furos had betrayed him, that was that. He should now be no different than everything else who had betrayed him, and Naruto owed him nothing in the first place. But no. That imprint of a conscience his Shinigami self had implanted in him wouldn't allow himself to think that way, and he was doing all he could to resist that. His claws were out and his teeth were bared, ready to tear into that broken, crumpled heap that was once an Adjuchas. But for some reason, when he walked up to the dying hollow, the look on his face stunned him. It was the look of a broken individual, one that had been through so much in his lifetime. He knew that expression very well. It was one that he had commonly worn during the early stages of his childhood. As he approached his beaten opponent, Furos had managed to pivot his body to the right, and Naruto noticed that the insect hollow was staring at him. Even in a broken state, Furos couldn't stop fixating him with powerful gazes. It didn't have much effect on Naruto, of course, but looking at him now, it seemed his former friend wanted to tell him something. With a motion so tediously slow, Furos managed to move his right pincer so it was pointing straight at where Naruto was standing. He seemed to open his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a puddle of blood. And Naruto, I know this may be too much to ask, the words finally came out, but he stopped to cough after that first sentence. I want YUT to listen to me one more time, he wheezed. Naruto, for all he was worth, should have finished him off right there, or at the very least should have spat in his face. But for some reason, he didn't. He thought about it, of course, but at the end, something made him hesitate. You could call it that single shred of a conscience working inside his mind to make it stop, but Naruto would just dismiss that and call it morbid curiosity. Naruto snarled at Furos' words. You've got some nerve trying to get me listen to you after what you just pulled. Tell me why I should listen to you, the words of a dying and broken hollow that just attacked me earlier. It's probably more of your idealistic bullshit anyway. There was a sudden increase in Furos' breath, like he was getting nervous. However, the fact that Naruto hadn't immediately killed him off was a slight reassurance at least. It meant he was contemplating it. Furos said nothing, and continued to stare up at Naruto, a slight condescending look entering his eyes. Naruto sneered, baring his putrid fangs harshly. Okay, fine, whatever. Since you have been traveling with me for so long, and maybe the closest thing I could call a friend, I will listen to your last words and grant you this one little mercy, and blah 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 blah. Done talking, he lumbered over to a nearby rock and sat himself down upon, his eyes dully fixated upon his former friend. Furos met his gaze, feeling slight regret that he had no one to tell his story except this hollow. There was a slight stinging in his eyes, and he felt something wet drip down the skin underneath his mask. Was he crying? He didn't know, he hadn't done it in so long. Hollows don't cry. But Furos wasn't exactly a normal hollow. The intense feeling of regret on his failure of a life would never appear in other hollows. His lip wavered against his will. He was so tired. So very tired. He just wanted to rest, to forget all of this. To pass it off as nothing more than a bad dream. But Furos knew that he couldn't do that. Whatever the case, the gods above had dealt him a very bad hand in life. But if he toughed it out and passed this information on, then he could rest in peace. Well, Furos faltered for a second when Naruto grunted something about time wasting, but continued his story anyway. It was quite some time ago. 50 years ago. Many captains have existed throughout the long history of Soul Society. And with these captains, came a vast number of improvements to the Shinigami race. Cultural, technological, medical. The genius minds of the captains and their subordinates helped efficiency with the Godai 13. For example, Urahara Kasuke founded the Shinigami Bureau of Research and Development along with his duties as the 12th Division Captain, and technological inventions such as Soul Candy made their way into mainstream Shinigami protocol. But this is a time where Urahara Kasuke and many other innovative captains have not even burst onto the scene yet. As such, the Shinigami Bureau of Research and Development did not even exist yet. It was a simple result of the great step of progress. This was before the time of great thinkers, before their ideas as well, and Soul Society was in a less advanced period of time. Oftentimes, it was as simple as go into the human world, conso a soul here and there and purify hollows. But that was not to say it was always that simple. The 4th Division's medical facilities existed under Uno Hanaretsu, albeit much less advanced than they would be in the future. There also existed an institution called the Institution of Experimental and Scientific Research, a little-known branch of Soul Society's military government that could be called the predecessor to the current Bureau of Research and Development. The small organization of close-knit minds would later fade into obscurity, as the Central 46 decided to disband the group and cover them up. Shinigami history books were rewritten and the individuals who knew about the institution would be sworn to secrecy. Why, you might ask? Well, it was because of a certain incident that occurred during the heyday of the institution. Furos was a hollow that didn't believe in the mass killing of humans and Shinigami. But that was at a time when he was naive, and his naivete is what got him captured so easily. He noticed the dim light and dripping of water, and the musty smell was a dead giveaway that he was underground. But Furos already knew that. How couldn't he? He had already been here for almost a year. The young Adjuchas cursed his curiosity. He was a hollow who fed on the flesh of his own species, and as such he rarely made any trips into the human world. But when he did, it was never to sample the flesh of the living. No, what compelled him to travel to the human world was simply curiosity. He had yearned for the experiences, and a background other than the drab and gloomy Hueco Mundo night sky. But sadly, his reputation as a hollow preceded him. After a few visits into the human world, he had met a group of Shinigami led by a vice-captain. Now, Furos was an Adjuchas, but he didn't have many special abilities. He was skilled at physical combat, but he had no Ryatsu or energy-based attacks. He had a tough time, but managed to ward off the vice-captain and his underlings. But he was not to be completely lucky in battle that day. After he had battled the vice-captain, who he thought to be the last one standing, an ugly bald Shinigami who he had knocked to the ground earlier had managed to constrict him with a powerful bakudo, sealing his movements and leaving him at the mercy of his captor. He would never forget the face of his captor as long as he lived. The cruel, mirthless grin that showed dozens of repugnant yellow teeth that hadn't been taken care of in years. His deep sunken eyes seemed only appropriate on a head half his size. His disgusting lard-filled body distended as the Shinigami approached, rancid green pox spots littering his body like a noxious decoration of mold. He vaguely noticed the gate back to Soul Society open, but he almost missed it as he was being roughly dragged around by the yellow Ryatsu rope that constricted around him. The Ryatsu rope tightened even further as the Shinigami's fat, grubby little fingers wrapped themselves around the edge of the rope. With yet another leer at the downed hollow, the Shinigami walked slowly towards the gate. The return trip to Soul Society was pretty bad. The Shinigami made sure traveling was as bad as possible. The friction of the ground cut into his skin, and his captor purposely backtracked a few times just so he could extend the experience. He blacked out soon after they had passed through the Dangai, but the brief view of Rakangai would be etched into his mind forever. The depressed souls that wandered the barren streets, thirsty and disease-ridden children, and slums for as far as he could see. This wasteland was the Soul Society everyone was supposed to yearn for. In comparison to the clean and white Siriidii, this place was hell. When he awoke, he was in for quite the change in scenery. Gone was the bright sun that washed over the land, and here was the dank, moldy black cell in nothing but pitch-black darkness. Furos groggily shook himself awake, his head pounded. He ran one of his pincers across his mask, and with relief noted that nothing on his mask had been damaged. A dim blue light drew his attention then after, which caused the hollow to turn his head to bars of the cage. They were the objects covered with the blue light, and its shimmery, luminescent glow was almost hypnotic to the eye. Furos reached out to touch it, but as soon as he did, a sharp jolt of pain reverberated throughout his entire body, sending his nerves and spine tingling. He hissed and backed away from the cage instantly, and while doing so heard a deep, cold laughter come from the outside. There was a figure standing outside of his new cell, and although the figure's face was shrouded in darkness, its rotund body and lack of visible hair gave away who it was immediately. "Don't bother, Adjuchas," sneered the Shinigami. "You are the property of the Institution of Experimental and Scientific Research now, and those bars have been reinforced with the bakudo of our strongest user. So just sit tight and don't make any noise. You'll join the others soon enough," he finished cryptically. Others, thought Furos, still confused over the whole ordeal. He had no idea what the Institution of Experimental and Scientific Research was, but to be quite frank, the thought of this situation terrified him. He was trapped in enemy territory. So, for weeks he waited and waited. He didn't talk, he didn't move, and he didn't give his captors any reason to pick on him. On his second day in captivity, he caught his first glimpse at the disciples of this place. They didn't look like normal Shinigami. They didn't wear black hakama or tabi sandals. Instead, they wore white lab coats and large, clunky boots that protected their feet from dangerous materials. It was also the day when he learned he was not alone in this room. The same moment when the scientists had entered the room, they walked all the way to the end of the hall, where they plucked, to Furumo's great surprise, another Adjuchas that had apparently been in a cell much like he was. This particular hollow seemed to be having a really rough time with it. Before taking it from the cell, one of the scientists used a fairly strong bakudo to restrain, and then proceeded to drag it out much like the Shinigami had done with him a couple days ago. As the two scientists passed by his cell, he had to look away as he viewed the expression on the captive's face. It burned in his mind for a few moments, that look of panic and hysteria. Would the same happen to him later? He didn't know whether he would have the same reaction, but as the hollow passed through the door at the end of the hall, everything became quiet, and not even the slow dripping of the water could disperse the thick tension that had spread itself throughout the room. There goes another one. We won't see that one again until the scientists have had their way with us as well. It won't be long now until yet another one of us goes beyond that door of no return, came a raspy voice directly to Furumo's right. There was a sudden murmur of agreement, and Furumo's, not expecting the reaction. This was the first time he had heard any of the other hollows speak. For God's sakes, brat, get a hold of yourself, came the voice again, and Furumo's knew that it was addressing him now. He was breathing very hard and loud, and he had smashed into the bars in surprise when he had heard the voice speak. Furumo's slowed his breathing down, and edged closer to the right cautiously, almost as if waiting for the voice to speak again. When it didn't, Furumo's asked a question he almost didn't want to. "Who are you?" he asked, his own voice sounding stark and gravelly after a few days of disuse. The voice growled, as if taking offense to a question like that. "My name's Braxicos. I'm just your standard, run-of-the-mill Adjuchas. 2 years ago, I was on a trip to the human world to eat some humans when this group of Shinigami ambushed me. One of the members took me back here, and I've been in this cell ever since. This institute. They secretly plant their members within a squad of Shinigami, and they take hollows back to their HQ alive for work on their perverted experiments." Furumo's breath hitched in his throat. "For what reason?" he asked. "Something about for the good of the Siriidii or make the enemy your own. Apparently they believe that if they experiment on hollows they can brainwash them into making them their obedient little slaves, and give them abilities so they can better fight off their own kind. At least, that's what I heard one of the devotees say. They haven't proposed their idea to the Central 46 yet, so right now they're working on this top-secret project away from Siriidi's prying eye. Working on something without the Central 46's permission is treason though, and I don't know what they're thinking." Furumo's almost croaked when the hollows around him started whispering to each other. "Anyway, I've seen hollows come and go into the room, and I'm starting to believe that the scientists here have forgotten about me. But every one of the hollows, no matter how stupid they might be, is prepared for the day when they'll be the one that is dragged unwillingly into the back room. That door is God here. We have no idea what happens behind it, but it reigns supreme over us with its morbid mystique." After Braxicos had finished, Furumo's began pounding his head against the cell door, ignoring the pain that shot through his system as he touched the blue light. He roared and shrieked, but no one came. The bars didn't fold, and the cage didn't open. Braxicos listened as Furumo's went through a panic attack, his face and body language betraying no emotion. He let Furumo's continue, and it wasn't until an hour later when the noises finally ceased, instead being replaced with silent convulsions. "It's no use doing that, kid. You're stuck here with the rest of us. Only the scientists out there know your day of reckoning. It may be soon, or it may be later. There's no way to know when it'll come, so stop panicking." Braxicos raised his voice near the end. A quiet whimper arose from Furumo's throat, and even though Braxicos couldn't see, the Adjuchas twitched slightly. Braxicos sighed. "You're quite the unusual hollow. Most of the hollows here are either stupid, or they're so hardened that they don't fear what's beyond the door. But you're different. You have a different fire. I can feel it. You're not that much like a hollow. If anything, you're more like a human. Furos didn't respond to that, and although he was opting to ignore the hollow in the next cage over, he would find himself quite amiable with him during their time in captivity. It had been over a year since Furos had been captured by the institution, and both he and Braxicos were never chosen to enter the room at the end of the hall. They had witnessed many hollows come and go, and now only about half of the original hollows when Furos was first captured still remained in their cells. The latter half had been taken. In the meantime, Furos had grown quite fond of the mysterious hollow in the cell to his right. Braxicos enjoyed talking to Furos about his life, and especially about his exploits. To Furos' dismay, he learned that Braxicos had a kill count of over 5,000 humans and 12,000 hollows, a fact he greatly prided himself on. Furos had called him out on that, but Braxicos did nothing more than laugh heartily and call him different than other hollows. The old hollow never lost his spark, but the year in prison was beginning to take its toll on Furos. He hated the Shinigami now, hated them for what they did to him, and what they are doing to everyone else. He hated them for leaving Rukangai to rot, while they live on with their cushy little lifestyles. He hated them for being at the top of the world. The corrupt bastards who make all the laws, determine how the world should be run, all the while leaving any species who isn't them out in the cold. He could sense that Braxicos hated them as well. Every time he spoke of them, Furos could practically feel the thinly veiled hatred pouring off each and every one of his words. When one of the scientists entered the room, he slathered the air with pure killing intent, one that would make any human piss their pants. That was the most interesting thing about Braxicos. His hatred of the Shinigami. Not his reasons, as they were same as anyone else's here. He hated them for imprisoning him for 3 years. What was interesting about his hatred for the Shinigami was his dream. Braxicos had told him about it one day while they were talking. His crazy dream he had developed after doing little more than thinking for the past 3 years. It was so stupid that it was stupid. It was so ludicrous that it was ludicrous. But it was probably the single most beautiful Furos could have ever heard in his entire life. Furos, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I have a dream I want to fulfill if I ever get out of this alive. The Shinigami are getting way out of hand here, and our very species is in jeopardy if the Shinigami get much more advanced. In my opinion, we need to take them out now and break the stranglehold they have over the world. With the Shinigami out of the way, us, the Hollows, can reign supreme over the Suriidii. We can live in soul society, and be permanently free of the Shinigami. We can build our own society of Hollows, and our territory will not just be limited to Hueco Mundo. And we can eat as many humans and souls as we like. He didn't say the last part. Furos felt a warm feeling enter his system as he thought about those words. But then, questions started to pop into his head, and he retreated to the dark recesses of his cell. Could they really build a society of Hollows? Would he really not have to live in Hueco Mundo anymore, and be free of its untamed wild and natural glory? To be free of the Shinigami. The thought made him giddy, but he knew it was almost without hope. They were trapped here, in the underground reaches of the Suriidii, and they had little power to be able to fight their mortal enemies. The slamming of a large, metal door brought him back to reality, and out of the corner of his eye he witnessed 3 of the scientists directly to his right. It can't be. Furos panicked, but remembered not to touch the bars of his cage. He heard a thumping noise and a grunt come from Braxicos' cage, followed by the 3 scientists apparently making room for something. And then, he saw it. He locked eyes with Braxicos for the first time ever. The old Adjuchas was small, much smaller than Furos, and resembled a blocky humanoid. He had earthy brown skin, and a humanoid torso and legs. His mask was form-fitting to his face, and jutted out at both of the corners near his chin. Braxicos grinned cheekily at the bewildered and frightened look on the young Adjucha's face, even when being restrained by Bakudo and being dragged to his doom. The look on his face was slightly sad, showing resignation, but at the same time he stood strong, filled to the brim with pride. a pride that everyone should have. Furos stood limp in his cell, and was too shell-shocked to make any motion even as the door slammed behind Braxicos. The room was silent, and Furos lost the only friend he had ever had during his time in captivity. 6 more months passed during his time in captivity, and Furos saw neither hide nor hair of his old friend. Since Braxicos had been taken away, Furos had felt a renewed fear of what was to come beyond that door. He sank in the darkness of his cell, neither talking nor moving yet again. One look at him and you would think he was comatose. His skin was turning a ratty brown color, and the labored breathing of his body told no secrets. He quickly garnered a reputation as the most senior hollow in the group, most of the others being no more than new, fresh captives for the institution. The other hollows would occasionally make lewd comments about him, but Furos ignored those as if they weren't there. When his time came, he barely even looked up at the scientists in front of him. He was too weary of it, of all of it, to even think about what he was going to do now. As the cage opened, and as he was bound with Kidu, the only thing he could think was how was Braxicos able to keep himself filled with pride? The door became nearer and nearer, and he felt the eyes of every hollow in the room watching him. He knew this wasn't surprising, he often partook in this himself, but being the one watched, it was a whole other experience. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened slowly, and Furos was finally graced with the knowledge of what lied behind the mystery of this door. There was a small hallway at first, which would have been just as dark as his cell had there not been another door on the opposite side where light filtered. The room on the opposite end of the hallway wasn't quite what Furos expected it to be. It was an incredibly large multi-floored circular room that must have measured 150 feet in diameter. There were 3 sublevels. The one he was on, the top, was little more than a passageway and a circular balcony to view the floors below. On the second sublevel, it was of a similar structure to the top sublevel, but there was more room for walking, as well as more extensions outwards. This space could be filled with things such as tubes, laboratory equipment, and other necessities needed for the institution. Looking at the second sublevel, Furos saw something that made him feel slightly nauseous. The Shinigami scientists. Working alongside Hollow's Adjuchas, much like him, he realized. Several he had personally seen being dragged from their cells to beyond the door. But they were barely recognizable. They had been so tampered with that Furos couldn't comprehend it. The most unified thing that was on the Adjuchas' face was their lifeless expressions. Clear indicators that they've been brainwashed into becoming nothing more than the slaves of the Shinigami. It was this that made Furos the most uncomfortable. Basically, it was just a horrible backtrack to their previous lives as mindless eating machines. By becoming an Adjuchas, hollows develop a chance. As proven by Baragan's kingdom, even hollows can work together and live in something resembling a society. But now, after being completely stripped of their free will, they have gone through the one thing that every Adjuchas fears: regression. When they were in their cells, the technicians had fed them very small, weak hollows to prevent them from regressing into Jillian. But now, there was no difference. Being a Jillian actually sounded more appealing. Other, more physical features were also present in the hollows. Some had grotesquely disproportionate limbs, so much that it was difficult for them to lumber about. A few were filled with giant crater-like holes of lumpy skin that steamed and oozed a disgusting green pus that was congregated in the center of the holes. On their wasted skin, blisters began to form all over their body due to the sheer acidity of their own pus. Others looked like they were melting, as goop-like liquid that was once their skin dripped off every few seconds. Some were even stuck together in groups of 4 or looked like they were going to phase out of existence entirely. This was obviously the Shinigami's attempt to increase the combat abilities of their captive. The final sublevel was incredibly small, but what it contained was the most important thing of all. It was a large, blood-stained operating table with numerous Kidu straps around him. Encompassing around it were a myriad of different operating tools and strange, noxious liquids and chemicals. There was a tube about 20 feet in diameter, which contained a foul, green liquid. It had just been opened recently, and if Furos guessed right, it was meant to contain the hollows for a short period of time. This was his destination, and his captors were leading him straight to. In the most cruel way possible, he was forced to look at the numerous hollows that were experimented on as he traveled down the flights of stairs to the table. He was dragged along forcefully, until when he reached the table, a very large institution guard hoisted up the Adjuchas hollow and placed him down on the operating table, and before he could even react, he was already bound to the table with the straps. He looked to his right. There were large amounts of beakers, each one holding an even fouler solution than the last. A bright light shone down on the Adjuchas, and before Furos shielded his eyes he saw 4 scientists, now wearing medical outfits instead of their normal lab coats. This one is especially lucky, Tai Cho. We've discovered a special hardening material that reflected certain wavelengths of light. These wavelengths of light influence the mind of other hollows. If this succeeds, it should be a great contribution to the war against hollows. The captain and chief operator of the Institution of Experimental and Scientific Research nodded. A tall, lean man with a thin, pointy mustache, looking positively delighted at this new development. Excellent, with this new material, we can turn this never-ending war against the hollows in our favor. We can spread the word of our institution's superiority, and we must let those fools at the Godii 13 and Central 46 know that the hollows must be destroyed at all costs. And the only way to do that is to send their own species at them. Yes, sir, said the other 3 technicians. The chief operator grinned. The old man's methods are too soft. All the evil that exists in this world is the result of hollows: war, famine, disease, death. It's all a result of hollows. Don't you forget that. Only with the control of their species can we have a perfect world. Now, give me the scalpel, he ordered. The chief operator held his hand out, and the nearest doctor handed him a blade that was much too big to be an ordinary scalpel. As soon as he held the large blade, the captain shrugged. No point in being gentle here, really. His musings done, the operator roughly jammed the scalpel into Furos' right pectoral muscle. Furos roared in pain, but that didn't stop the chief from sawing through his pain with all the precision of a buzzsaw. The operator cut all the way through in a circle, and ripped out several layers of Furos' skin in an instant, and threw the silver hunk of flesh haphazardly behind him. Furos roared some more, his underlying muscles being visible to everyone. Show me the solution quickly, and we'll see how well it works, commanded the captain. Yet another doctor walked on over to the table to Furos' right, and grabbed 3 beakers of a toxic-looking green liquid. Quick! Quick! Pour it! Yelled the captain. The doctor obliged. Right where the hole in Furos' skin was, the doctor poured in the sickly green liquid until it completely replaced where Furos' skin was. In morbid fascination, Furos and the scientists watched as the green material slowly hardened to a crystalline substance. But that wasn't where the solution stopped. Other than harden, the unnatural substance slowly began to merge and graft together with Furos' skin and muscle, becoming just as much a part of his body as everything else was. It was horrendously painful, of course, and it burned, as was apparently by the high amount of steam that was rising from the area. When it was done, the doctors cheered. The green substance had managed to perfectly graft together with Furos' body, and now there was a crystalline green patch present where there had been smooth silver skin before. The captain stopped laughing after about 30 seconds. We're not done yet. We must do more. And that was exactly what the doctors did. Over an hour of brutal, torturous operation, the technicians cut out the poor Adjuchas' skin and replaced with the abominable green solution. They operated on his arms, his legs, his neck, and all over his back. By the time they had finished, Furos was littered with large, green crystalline patches that gave off in dim, eerie green light. He was truly an abomination, a walking freak show even by hollow standards. When they brainwashed him into becoming their slave, he would be no different than all of the other hollows in this room. He needed to escape, he had to escape. Isn't it strange that Braxico's dream would be ringing in his head right about now? Quick, get him into the tube. Brainwash him into becoming our servant. This masterpiece must serve the institution for as long as we are alive, yelled the chief. Furos barely registered the chief's words in his mind. Nuh! Screamed Furos at the prospect of being brainwashed. And then, as if a miracle had occurred, a powerful green light burst forth from the crystalline substance on Furomo's body. It shone throughout the whole room, and scientists and hollows alike turned to gaze at the hypnotic spell. Time passed. 30 seconds. And then all hell broke loose. Hollows broke free of their mindless state just to get a glimpse at the hypnotic light bursting forward from Furomo's body. They had to get there, by whatever means possible. Ignoring the protests of the Shinigami, the hollows jumped from the ledge down towards the operating table. Several hollows knocked into tubes containing a deadly liquid. The glass smashed readily, and the acid on the inside splashed all over nearby scientists. They screamed as the acid ate away at their clothes and skin. They run to and fro in pandemonium, trying desperately to get to water, all the while knocking into more things and causing more damage. The chief operator and his disciples tried to fight off the oncoming horde of operated hollows, but they were no fighters, and they were quickly and easily crushed to death by the hulking beasts coming their way. One of the hollows landed at the foot of the operating table, jerking it forward. The Kidu's straps snapped like a twig under the intense pressure. Furomo's fell onto the floor nearby, looking the nearby hollows who came from all over to stare at the hypnotic light. Despite his misfortune, he smiled a little. Now he would be able to fulfill Braxico's, and by extension his dream. So, the Shinigami experimented on you, and you escaped by pure luck, is that right? Asked Naruto. Naruto had listened to the entire story in a rare moment of stoicism, but on the inside, his feelings would be quite different. That's right. Afterwards, me and the rest of the hollows managed to escape back to the surface of the Siriidii. The Central 46 were alerted to the actions of the institution, and labeled it an act of terrorism. Every surviving member was imprisoned for life. They were going to go after us as WL, but we managed to escape back into the human world. Naruto stood up from his rock, and stared at Furomo's with an intense feeling. What it was, Furomo's couldn't place, but judging by his increased breathing, something about his story had bothered the young hollow greatly. So, let me get his straight. Your final request of me is... The world was silent, and then Furomo spoke in an all-serious voice. I'll let my dream live on. Take down the Shinigami, and form a society, a safe haven for us hollows. Please, Naruto. I'm begging you here. That's the only thing I want. With it, I can die happy. I know I was wrong to attack you, and I'm deeply sorry. So please. Naruto sighed, and looked at the absolute pleading look, the desperate groveling look that was on Furomo's face. He truly was a broken spirit, who had gone through so much in his life, and was rewarded so little. He was banking everything on this one final thing. Without it, well, what was left? He leaned down towards Furomo's, and made full eye contact with his former friend. He held it there for a few seconds before he smiled lightly. A genuine smile, a kind smile. A feeling of hope blossomed in Furomo's chest. Naruto had never acted this way before. Naruto kept the kind smile on his smile, all the while not breaking eye contact. And then, he said, No. The one word, that forever crushed Furomo's hopes and dreams under a simple 2-letter. No. 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 And then, silence. Without making his mark on the world, the kind Adjuchas known as Furomo's died, in the most cruel, vile way possible. By building up his hopes with a phony smile, and crushing them under its filthy, iron boot. As soon as Naruto had slit Furomo's throat, the kind smile that had grown on his face was replaced by a purely malicious one. He had crushed Furomo's dreams into the ground, and was feeling great about it. He kicked the corpse a little more, delighting himself in the way it moved. And then, with a final glance back at it, he turned and walked away, but not before talking to himself for a little bit.